I am Ethan Maxwell. I am 37 years old and I live in Seattle, Washington. Until recently, I was a man who measured his worth by his logic, a successful quantum computing architect who only trusted what could be quantified, what could be seen and touched, what could be proven. I was the definition of an atheist. If science couldn't measure it, it simply didn't exist. My initial situation, I had everything. The perfect career, a beautiful, financially secure life, a mind that never stopped calculating. Everything but peace. I didn't believe in God. I didn't need him. I believed in the elegant, unforgiving equations of the universe, and I was convinced I was the master of my own life. I thought I was free, but I was living in a cage of certainty.
I didn't believe in God until he proved me wrong. It took me losing everything, every logical pillar of my existence, to finally open my eyes. The truth didn't come in a sudden blinding light of light, or a miracle in the sky. It came through a concept, a phrase that finally bridged the huge, terrifying gap between my rigorous science and the terrifying emptiness of my own heart. A phrase that opened a door between science and faith. This is the story of how an atheist who trusted only the cold, hard data finally understood that the greatest equation of all is not E equals mc squared, but F plus E plus A equals M. Faith plus emotion plus action equals miracle. My fall was not a quick drop. It was a slow, agonizing erosion. First, the startup I'd poured 5 years of my life into collapsed due to a market shift I hadn't predicted, a failure of logic. Then my marriage, which I believed was built on solid, rational partnership, disintegrated because I had forgotten that relationships are based on feeling, not spreadsheets. I was suddenly staring at an empty apartment in Seattle, the rain mirroring the cold, gray void inside me. My mind, my greatest asset, became my torturer. It was a constant, deafening noise. You failed. You should have calculated better. You're alone. You're ruined. I realized I wasn't managing my life. I was managing my fear. Every action, every decision was a repetition of the same mental programming: control, predict, analyze, resist. I was running an infinite loop of the past, creating the same results, the same emotional state of scarcity and isolation, day after day. My personality, built on the foundations of logic and skepticism, was in fact creating my personal reality. I was a brilliant man, but emotionally I was a self-sabotaging machine. And the worst part was the complete, utter absence of meaning. Where do you turn when the very framework of your reality, logic, tells you that your suffering is just a random collection of unfortunate data points? The fear was so thick I could taste it, a metallic bitterness on my tongue. It was a terrifying, profound disconnection. The sheer scientific elegance of that hit me. My mind, my programming, was an old operating system built on fear and scarcity. My daily thoughts, my internal dialogue of failure and lack, were merely the chemical residue of past experiences. I wasn't creating, I was repeating. My body, conditioned by years of stress hormones, had literally become the mind itself, addicted to the familiar suffering. My emotions, anger, resentment, victimhood, were the vibrational frequency I was emitting into the quantum field, and the universe, being a purely non-judgmental mirror, was simply reflecting that same low frequency back to me in the form of more loss and more chaos. I suddenly understood that God wasn't some distant entity to be pleaded with. The divine was the boundless, intelligent quantum field, and my job wasn't to ask for a miracle, but to become the miracle by changing my internal state. The science wasn't opposing faith, it was describing how faith, a coherent, focused state of mind and emotion, actually works. I had to break the habit of being myself. I had to die to the old, logical, scared Ethan before the new one could be born. The work began that very day, a rigorous, self-imposed scientific experiment. My objective, to change my electromagnetic signature. The first step was to silence the mind. I started with Dispenza's meditations, a practice that, as an atheist, felt ridiculous and weak at first. I would sit for an hour, battling the internal chatter, the intrusive thoughts, the memories of failure trying to pull me back into the familiar hell of the past. This is wasted time. You should be working. This is nonsense. But I persisted. Every time a thought of the past or fear of the future crept in, I would consciously thank it and return to the present moment. Then came the mentalizing and the feeling. I wasn't just thinking about the new life, I was entering it. I visualized the new Ethan, whole, abundant, reconciled. I didn't see a new job, I focused on the feeling of contribution. I didn't visualize a new wife, I focused on the feeling of unconditional love and shared intimacy. I was programming a new future, not from lack, but from a profound feeling of wholeness. The most critical step was moving that thought from my analytical mind to my emotional heart. I would consciously open my heart, feeling the elevation, the gratitude for the future reality as if it had already happened. This wasn't wishful thinking, it was generating the energetic blueprint of my desire.
And finally, acting with faith. The universe doesn't respond to what you want, it responds to what you are. As I began to embody this new, grateful, and whole frequency, small changes appeared. I made an unexpected phone call to my former business partner, not to demand money or blame him, but to express genuine gratitude for the knowledge gained. I offered my time as a mentor to a small coding school, not focusing on getting a job, but on the joy of teaching. These small acts, these new works, were the proof that my inner shift was real. I was no longer waiting for external evidence to feel whole. I felt whole, and my actions flowed naturally from that state. The fear was replaced by a quiet, unwavering certainty, a state that felt remarkably like the traditional concept of faith. The manifestations began not as a jackpot, but as a series of perfectly timed, impossible divine coincidences. The coding school I was volunteering at had a wealthy benefactor. During a casual coffee, I was explaining a complex quantum concept, not seeking funding, but sharing my passion. He looked at me, not with pity, but with pure interest. He wasn't looking for an employee, he was looking for a partner for a new, revolutionary project. A project in quantum computing that perfectly utilized my unique, niche skill set. He didn't hire me. He invited me to co-create something new. The job description was a perfect reflection of the future I had been feeling. Simultaneously, the walls I had erected in my marriage began to crumble. My estranged wife called, not for logistics, but just to talk. Because I was no longer operating from the frequency of victimhood, the conversation shifted. I was able to offer a genuine apology, not for what happened, the circumstances, but for who I was, the state of being during that time. I was no longer demanding reconciliation, I was simply embodying love and wholeness. The space for healing opened because the source of the chaos, my own internal frequency, had been eliminated. It was a staggering realization. I hadn't attracted a miracle. I had become the frequency of the miracle. The universe, in its perfect, logical elegance, simply rearranged matter to match the new signal I was transmitting. The most beautiful manifestation wasn't the professional success or the potential for reconciliation. It was the profound internal peace that settled over me. I was no longer afraid of the future because I knew I was actively creating it, not through brute force logic, but through coherence between my mind and my heart. The external world, once my relentless environment, had become my feedback loop, my friendly mirror.
In a deep meditation one morning, the final veil was lifted. The equation was complete. I understood why the atheist had suffered and why the new creator was thriving. I realized that faith isn't waiting, it's alignment in motion. I had always thought faith was blind belief, a passive hoop in an external power. But my journey with neuroscience and the quantum field revealed the scientific truth of faith. Faith is a coherent state where your thoughts, the clear intention, align with your emotions, the elevated feeling of the already done. This alignment creates a massive electromagnetic field that broadcasts your new reality into the universe. That's not passive belief, that's active creation. The wisdom of the ages, the great spiritual texts, suddenly made perfect scientific sense. The phrase of the great neuroscientist Joe Dispenza, that you must break the habit of being yourself to create a new life, mirrored a profound ancient spiritual law, one I had always mocked in my skepticism. The Bible, in the book of James, says, "Faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead." James 2:17. I had finally found the connection. The works that James speaks of are not just physical actions, they are the works of the heart. The action of generating an elevated emotion, gratitude, love, joy, before the physical manifestation. This emotional work is what gives power and life to the mental intention. The faith of my new mind, connected to the elevated energy of my heart, powered by the smallest inspired physical actions, was the formula for every miracle, every divine coincidence I had experienced. The ultimate act of faith is to maintain the feeling of the desired future, even when the external world screams contradiction. I didn't find God. I realized that I was hardwired for the divine. The entire universe is a logical reflection, an elegant scientific mechanism that responds perfectly to the coherent frequency of an open mind and an open heart. So if you're listening to me, and you're caught in the same logical cage I was in, if you're waiting for external proof or a sign from a distant deity, stop. You are the sign. You are the laboratory. The breaking point came in the middle of the night, during a panic attack so severe I thought I was having a heart attack. I was curled up on the cold floor of my bare living room, shaking, gasping for air. There was no logic left, no algorithm to save me. In that moment of absolute primal vulnerability, my rational mind completely shut down. And what came out of me, an echo from a childhood I thought I had rejected, was a whisper of a prayer. Not a formal prayer, not a plea to a dogma, but an almost involuntary scream into the dark. If you are real, if there is anything beyond this miserable, logical existence, prove it. I wasn't praying out of faith. I was praying out of pure, desperate scientific curiosity, an ultimate, final test. I demanded proof from the unprovable. The silence that followed was heavy, crushing. No booming voice, no burning bush, just the sound of the rain and my own ragged breathing. I lay there for hours, completely surrendered, completely exhausted, completely empty. The ultimate atheist, defeated by the weight of his own existence. In that complete zero state, no past, no future, just the painful present, I wasn't trying to find God. I had finally gotten out of the way of the universe. The answer didn't come in the religious section of the library. It came from a neuroscientist, a man whose work spoke the language of my former life, Dr. Joe Dispenza. I was randomly scrolling through a science podcast, seeking comfort in complex theories, when his voice cut through the noise. He wasn't talking about miracles in the traditional sense. He was talking about quantum mechanics, epigenetics, and brain coherence. And then I heard the phrase that felt like a key turning in a long locked door, a phrase that fused the exact cold logic of my world with the emotional, terrifying void I was experiencing. You can't create a new life with the same mind that created the old one.